It's time again to grab our whips, to whip the candles, and look for the candle chicken. Welcome back to Castlevania, except this time on Game Boy?
Wow, it's a Game Boy.
Welcome to this special Let's Play for the month of June, which is actually going to be a twofer. Castlevania The Adventure is what we're starting on, which is what you're looking at right now. The Game Boy, first ever Game Boy Castlevania title.
Black and white.
And black and white, well, and the Game Boy equivalent would be black and green. So, a couple of things that I need to go over. First of all, development-wise. Obviously, this was, if people didn't know, this was one of the launch titles of the Game Boy. Castlevania made it before Zelda, but not Mario. Okay, so Mario was one of the launch titles as well as Castlevania The Adventure. Now, development-wise, this actually was a really hard game to adjust because obviously there's one thing missing here, Alex, that is kind of essential to the last couple of games. Can you think of what that is?
No.
Could it be color?
Oh, yeah, color.
So, one of the things also that they had to overcome was the fact that, first of all, the Game Boy was way more simple. So, their original Castlevania interface wasn't going to work here, and so sub-weapons are not in this game at all.
Makes sense.
The other thing that they had to do was, how do you show that the whip is upgrading? Because obviously in Castlevania 1 through 3, you had a shimmering whip as the high-end whip. In this, they basically said, okay, we're gonna do two things here. First things first is we're gonna create an upgrade system that if you get hit, kind of like in Zelda, you lose your whip upgrades. By one step each time you get hit. So if you have the full whip, you only go down to the previous whip.
Okay.
Second thing they did was the whip upgrades. You start off with a leather whip, you can then upgrade to a chain whip, and then finally to a whip that shoots freaking fireballs.
Nice.
Keep in mind, this is the only time they did it. Because it was the Game Boy, you know, you couldn't have a shimmering whip.
Yeah, but I understand, but you could have drawn a new sprite.
Yeah. So at that point, that's mainly the development changes here for Castlevania The Adventure. Story-wise is where it gets a little interesting, because this is canon. You might think we're playing as either Simon or Trevor, right?
Right.
We are not. We are actually playing as Christopher Belmont. He is technically Simon's grandfather. So where Trevor is basically like 100 years... he's a great-great-great-grandpa to
right.
Simon. They wanted something a little bit closer to Simon, but Simon's already had like 4 games at this point. It's more actually up to 6. So they made Christopher, who is his grandfather. This is his take on when he had to take down Dracula as the vampire hunter. So a lot of people actually were under the assumption that you were playing as Simon in these games. You are not. You are playing as Christopher Belmont. And his journey on trying to free the land from Dracula's curse. And I think I cut off Andrea at one point.
Yeah, I was gonna question, didn't this game start out with some sort of, like, introduction?
No. Not at all. That's why a lot of people made the assumption. Because even the manual wasn't clear on the matter. The manual actually refers to it and kind of alludes to the fact you're playing as Simon. It doesn't name the Belmont in this game. The most that you can get is eventually you see that there is like a Simon C. Belmont. That was where it was supposed to say in the Japanese version, this is Christopher Belmont.
And you died.
And I died. That's alright. Because I got a checkpoint.
Oh, that's good. Checkpoints.
Now, the little orb right there, that's a whip upgrade. So if I get hit again, I will go back down to the leather whip, which is the weakest whip.
Right.
But as you can see, this is a fairly simple and streamlined game. But you know what? Kudos to Capcom, or not to Capcom, Konami, for working with what they had, because they were still experimenting with the Game Boy at this point. They didn't know what the Game Boy was really capable of, aside from 8-bit graphics and a black and white tone. This is also one of the considered part of the series that is a hardcore type of title. As you can see, it moves kind of sluggish.
Yes.
That's mainly because of the Game Boy constraints. And they actually kind of catered the level design around the fact you cannot move fast. So you have to use a lot more patience in this game than you had in previous Castlevania titles. Sorry, I had to take a drink there, because holy crap, that's a lot to say.
Oh, bats.
Bats.
Oh, there gotta be so many bats.
Because it's Castlevania, duh.
Well, unless if it was Legend of Zelda right now, they'd be keys.
They'd be keys.
What's that? Bat? Keys.
Keys. And what's that, a Lingeldorfen? Oh, it's a rock.
And they keep on coming.
They're just respawning.
They are respawning because I have to get up to these platforms to move forward.
Right.
So it's just a respawn bat. And I failed, which means the bat's gonna respawn again. But at this point, as you can tell, Adam finally got the rhythm
Feel the rhythm.
of the night. Latched onto the morning light.
And the symphony of the night.
Indeed. And that's coming. So,
Aw, now you're... Can you get back up?
I can. I just have to go back.
Oh good, at least you won't have to go back all the way.
Yes, and I also don't have to worry about the respawning bat. Also, the other thing to account for is that this LP, there's a reason why we're double featuring this, is because these games aren't that long.
It's short, it's Game Boy.
It's Game Boy. So, believe it or not, this game actually has a combined 4 levels. That's it. And we're already at the first boss.
What are you doing? What are you humming? I mean,
It makes me think of Sonic.
Dun 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 dun.
The platforms of the
ah,
Could be.
battlefield.
you're thinking, yeah.
Well, we have succeeded in the first level of Castlevania the Adventure. Now, another fun factoid that I actually want to give to you guys, this is the first Castlevania game, and I think the only one, that has ever received a fan remake.
Oh,
Now, a lot of people might be wondering, why didn't I play the fan remake? Because, you know, I talk so much about indie games. It was a WiiWare title, and WiiWare no longer exists. And I didn't get it in time. So, yes, there is a WiiWare remake called Castlevania The Adventure Rebirth, which basically puts color into it. It's the exact same story, except with more modern Castlevania tropes put in.
okay.
So, you actually had sub-weapons, and you had a couple other improvements to the overall game design. But since it was WiiWare, you can't get it anymore.
Oh, so it was kind of like if you were thinking of Link's Awakening, where there was like a kind of like a remake sort of thing, only.
Not quite. So the remake that happened to Link's Awakening was just to abridge it to color, which would be Link's Awakening DX. That's what you're thinking of. This actually got a full-on console remake by an indie developer. So it actually looks like previous Castlevania games, not in black and white, completely in color, and runs off of current systems within Castlevania games at the time. So, I think a lot of people akin it to the Genesis game Bloodlines in how it ran. So, I might be wrong about that. Please leave a comment below.
Ah, boomerangs.
It's actually a scythe. But you wouldn't be able to tell, would you?
Not really.
It's black and white. A lot is left to the imagination. And a lot of these enemies in the adventure you probably will never see again. Since they were only useful in adventure. Like the, if you remember, we saw a bunch of rolling eyeballs.
Yeah.
The eye bombs is what they're called. They don't show up again. Aside from in the GameCube, or the GameCube, Game Boy universe. Now, why did I just make that reference? It's still canon. Christopher Belmont is still a thing. And enough of the thing that he got a second game.
Not bad.
Because the next game that we're going to be playing, Belmont's Revenge, you're also playing as Christopher. Now, a lot of other things that you guys might be confused about is somebody's going to ask, why wasn't it Simon? Simon had gotten up to 6 games at this point, and that's confusing, so let me elaborate. At this point, he had 4. He had the original Castlevania, he had Simon's Quest. However, there was an arcade remake of the original game called Vampire Killer, which is Castlevania 1, essentially. Then, there was also a MSX remake of this, or the first Castlevania game called Vampire Hunter. Or, no, that's Vampire Killer. The arcade game was called Haunted Castle.
Okay.
So you had 4 games, 3 of which were remakes of the first game.
Right.
Then we added 2 others of the first game. So,
If you hit those eyeballs that make the bridge break.
yes, they are eye bombs. So they explode when you kill them. Now, one question that people might be bringing up, are we going to go into the other remakes? Not all of them, no. We are going to go into one of them, but that's just because it's considered one of the best Castlevania games in the series. So we will be doing one remake, but you'll find out why when we get there. And this part I hated, because if you can actually make these platforms work, there's an extra life right there.
Oh.
And I never get that jump. Oh, look, multiple branching paths, and you can actually get lost in here.
That's pretty surprising for a Game Boy game, especially an early one.
Yep. Again, this was Konami experimenting with the Game Boy and figuring out what they could do, what they couldn't do with it. And having a story behind it, too. Invincibility. I love it. Yeah, they basically changed the cross that kills everything on the screen to an invincibility tool in this game. Which I'm so thankful for, because I actually had to play this game kind of hardcore. And I have no problem saying this. Once we get to the latter levels, this is an emulator, and yes, I use save states. I have no problem admitting this. This game kicked my butt a couple of dozen times. Kind of like that. So overall, just first impressions, what are you guys thinking of the graphics of this game compared to other Game Boy games that you've played?
I mean, it's early Game Boy, so I'm not going to judge it too harshly.
Oh, and we are finally to the boss. And this is the first time the Flea Men have ever been utilized as a boss. Yes, these are supposed to be the Game Boy equivalent of the Flea Men. And I got an extra life!
Woohoo!
Yes, because you earn points in this game.
And you lost it.
Yeah, I did.
It looks like a frog.
Yeah, it's Game Boy, so... Like, when I first looked at it, I went, there are ninjas in Castlevania? And part of it was because of the sickle guy, because it was like, he looks kind of like a ninja too. And I just lost my whip upgrade. Dang it! Trust me when I say this, when you get the final whip upgrade, it's God mode in this game. Everything dies so quick.
Too bad though you lose it.
Yeah. And even though I got the whip upgrade, I stayed at a leather whip. I don't know why. Which means I have to play this hardcore mode. Because if you had the third whip, like, the 3 holes down at the bottom are so easy to reach that you were just kind of hoping for them. Let's see, and I actually had to look. I'm like halfway here. I've got 5 left.
I thought it looked like that bar kept regenerating.
What, on the right?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's the boss meter.
Yeah, so they can regenerate?
No. No, what you're looking at probably is the left one, which is my health bar.
No, I know yours compared to the boss.
Yeah, it doesn't regenerate. Maybe it does at the beginning of the level. to say there's a new boss. Of course that didn't work. Yay! We finally beat the second boss! We're halfway into this game.
Halfway there.
And now you can see my points. But that's going to go ahead and do it for this part. So next time, we will finish this thing.
Finish it.